Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Rethink the Future clinic that we have here today, paper presentation. My name is Kelly Garner. I have been on the MEIEA as a general board member for the last 4 years. It's been my pleasure to do that. And I have taught at many different institutions. I was at Belmont for 10 years. Then I was at the University of Miami, where I did my doctorate for 3 years, and I was also at Miami-Dade while I was down there teaching adjunct. And then I went to Union University and created a commercial music business program there, and also music technology master's degree. And so I've seen lots of different sides of education, many different types of institutions, and so it's given me an interesting perspective on things. We have some great papers here today. I think they all could last for an hour, to be honest. But we're going to try to push through them really quickly. And I wanted to say this. I think some of the things we're addressing today have to be at the forefront of what we're doing, because we all, as educators, are trying to make a difference in this world. And I think that these are the kinds of things that we have to come together as a community and try to work and give each other ideas and all those kinds of things. I'm going to start today with Michelle Conceição. She is at MTSU, and I'm starting with this topic only because I have really experienced some discriminatory types of things recently, and even diversity issues. And so it's kind of close to my heart. And so I'm going to let Michelle just begin. Michelle, tell us about your paper and just give us a little short synopsis of some of that.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you. Thank you for sharing that too. It can be really, it can be hard to talk about diversity issues. And I think, I kind of reached out to see if we'd talked much about some of the research that's come down in the music industry recently about research about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I heard that we hadn't had a lot of talking about it. So I just thought I would try to write a paper that synthesized or at least tried to find some of the through lines in some of the research recently. So the paper and the presentation is certainly not a complete literature review of diversity research. I'm sure there's many folks in this Zoom and in this interface and also in the conference that know just as much and maybe more than I do about this. But I realize in the last 2 years, we've all been, flipping and pivoting and going online and going offline and going hybrid and doing all these things. And it may have been hard to keep up with a lot of the incredible research that's been happening about equity. And so what I've done here is to try to take folks through the organizations primarily that are doing a lot of research, a lot of the key findings that have come out in the last 5 years, and some observations about, what can I see having sat down and looked at all this at once. I also have thrown in a few things that, in order to kind of look at research in the last 5 years, I really had to look at what was done before it. And, one thing that I found was that the way the word diversity is used is very different. So the nature of research has dramatically changed of literally what we mean in the music industry when we say diversity and what we mean in the academic community when we are studying diversity. I've talked a little bit about the change in academia's relationship with the industry and how that has propelled some of this research forward. And the fact that in the recent studies that are happening are driven more by industry than they had been in the past. That historically it was more academics who was doing this research, and now a lot more academics partnering with industry organizations. And the third major point is really the momentum for change that is in the industry now and what that looks like. So I'd say those are the three key takeaways. I hope folks will watch the presentation if they haven't yet. The first 10 minutes does a really good job at summarizing it. And then I've kind of gone through all of the big reports that have come out with the key statistics after that. So if you got 10 minutes, you're good. If you got 35 minutes, you can really take in a lot of data. But, a lot of it is a reflection of what is academia's role in what's happening in the industry. Clearly, we are bringing up the future of the industry through our classrooms, and how can we keep up with, stay ahead of, help propel some of this change, as opposed to simply researching it after it's occurred. And but I'm excited about the momentum for change. And I think it's important. Maybe I'll finally say just that, one thing I had to really reckon with was, like, I'm a white woman, like I'm a lesbian, or an out lesbian white woman who has had a lot of opportunities in my life. The adversity that I have faced, I think has been overcome by a lot of the privileges that I've had. And it felt, I had a bit of imposter syndrome as I was writing this, because I'm like, who am I to write about the research done by all these people? I mean, it's incredible, the depth and breadth of research that's been done across the world. And I'm certainly just trying to cull it literally for our community at MEIEA. So this isn't sort of a bigger book I'm writing or anything. I think I have other research that's coming later that falls off of this, but I really intentionally put together this conversation specifically for this conference and for our cohort to be able to talk about some of the research that's happened.
Well, I'm going to just mention, Michelle, a few of the key words that I picked up on through listening to your research. You've already mentioned overcoming adversity, embracing who you are, encouraging the collegial discussion. I love that, because I think that's sometimes something we're afraid of, but
Yeah.
we've got to get better at that. Encouraging and embracing and celebrating the work of others,
Yeah.
And then as you were saying something, I think I heard you say something in there, studying diversity. The studying of diversity has changed over time. I thought that was interesting. And even how we look at it. So
yeah, I mean, in the sort of 70s and in the sort of, to try to summarize, in the 70s, we really were talking about diversity as the different genres, more so like mere difference, not cultural and ethnic diversity or other forms of diversity. In the 90s, we were really looking back at that research and bringing it into a contemporary sense, in light of really hip hop and rap becoming such a popular genre, and sort of, it was more about major label practices of A&R and how that was inadvertently leading to diversity. And I think in 2008 to 12, you saw a lot more gender focus, and maybe I'd say through 15, 16, you're seeing a lot of gender focused research. And now you're seeing a lot more focus on racism, sexism, homophobia, different issues pertaining to accessibility and disability rights, and more inclusive gender spectrum research. So 3 studies have now come out that recognize sort of a non-binary gender spectrum. So it is evolving, and we're all part of that evolution. I will put in the chat a link to, I know in the presentation I say I'm going to give you all the links. So I have a Google Doc with a bunch of resources. It has all the research that's in this paper in terms of links to it in case you want to present it in your classrooms, and a bunch of other extra stuff that I thought professors might like to have access to. So feel free to share that. It's an open Google Doc that folks can use as they need. So I'll do that after we're done talking.
Great. And even moving even forward on our discussion, Marcus, I'm gonna move on to you, but even just continuing that conversation of moving forward and how we move forward. I think I thought really hard about what order to put all of us in today. Marcus, what you're really talking about too is reconstituting the business of record labels and moving how to form to that more perfect union. Would you give us and speak your title again and tell us a little bit about that title?
Sure. Thanks, Kelly. My name is Marcus Thomas. I'm a chair of music and performing arts management at the Hart School of the University of Hartford. And our program is not just music and music business, but we also do dance and theater and the business of those industries as well. My paper topic was to form a more perfect union, reconstituting the business of record labels, in particular major record labels. And this is sort of an exploratory paper that has come out of a couple of classes that I've taught and the questions that have come up in class. In, for example, entertainment ethics, we start with the foundational principles of ethics and ethos of how to form a perfect society versus how the laws actually work within that society, what we think we want versus what we actually have. And then within entertainment law, I always do exercises with my students covering, here's the current state of contracts or our practice. How do you think you might want to reimagine this, or how should this look for a better relationship? And so as we look at these legal practices, I always like to start with, okay, well, where's our foundation? Where do we derive this from? So we might talk about copyright and go back to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, or we're looking at, the right of free speech in the First Amendment. And so it has occurred to me over time that a lot of the things that I've thought of, advocated for, and other people have advocated for, and my students have commented on, are actually pretty well encapsulated in the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, which broadly says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings for liberty for ourselves and our posterity, do hereby establish this Constitution. And as I looked at the 5 latter provisions of that, it really made sense that so many of the restructuring elements of the business could tie back to the preamble. And so we think of establishing justice and what the original framers were looking to do for their citizens. I think the same sort of reworking needs to happen within the record business for long-term health and sustainability. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing now are the challenges to masters as work for hire. And if artists aren't able to buy them or own them outright, then perhaps they will go to the efforts of re-recording them. I think that should be pushing labels to think more equitably about this practice. There are 2 lawsuits that are still working their way through the courts. When I first thought of this, Dwight Yoakam was still in court, but that is now settled since late February. So the matter could be decided at court, but why wait for a court to make a decision, or maybe wait for Congress to take some inaction, which they have not done since '76. I think these should be treated as equitable liens. There's no legal basis for sound recordings to be works made for hire within the meaning of current copyright law. They're not contributions to collective works as the labels would like to see. And at the end of the day, artists recoup the cost, successful artists recoup the cost for those records, but yet they do not own them. So perhaps labels should be looking at creating an equitable lien whereby which we front the money, we advance the money, we have a lien plus profit, the artist recoups at some point, and they're able to regain ownership of their masters. In the majority of cases so far that we've seen where artists have sort of challenged for the 35-year termination period, we're talking legacy artists here, obviously. A lot of those cases have, and the case of Mr. Yoakam, settled. Others have just redone a new distribution deal whereby the artist may get ownership, the label continues to have perpetual distribution rights. I think going forward in the future, as more artists become savvier about distribution and their other avenues, they'll probably forego dealing with the label if they're not going to own the masters in the first place. In terms of ensuring tranquility, a lot can be done by just simply drafting plain language contracts. And this doesn't get rid of the necessity for lawyers. It simply reduces the barrier of mistrust where artists feel, well, I don't know what I'm signing. I can't read it and understand it for myself. So how do I now trust this label that I'm going to be working with? And is the dealing fair? Eliminating or reducing things such as re-record restrictions. We saw in response to Taylor Swift's actions to re-record her masters, allegedly at least one label decided to lengthen the re-record restriction period as opposed to identifying whether or not it's even make sense to keep those restrictions in place. As technology develops and as artists have more access to full-fledged studios at a budget, the barriers to re-recording won't be there the way that they were. And quite frankly, to my ear, I've listened to Taylor's re-releases and they sound phenomenal. They sound as good as the original, with the added benefit of having had 17 plus years of singing them, touring with them, and practicing with them. As other artists take note of what Taylor's doing, it's quite possible that other, certainly superstar artists, as they end near the end of their deals, that they may opt to just say, I'm out and I'm going to re-record my masters. We've seen at least one other artist, I just lost the name, was it Ashanti, that has decided to, do this same thing. Providing for the common defense, I think labels treat artists as serfs. I can't say employees because they're not that within the legal definition, but they should see them as partners. And certainly if they have an equitable lien in the master, then it becomes more of a partnership. So when they're negotiating with third parties, whether it be streaming deals or, for example, right now with the American Music Fairness Act that is working its way, the label should see the artist as a partner and lobby on behalf of the artist. The better the artist does, the better the label does. We're partners at this, and it shouldn't be this pitting of against one another if there's going to be this more perfect union. Some of the things, this next bullet, I think, has come up earlier today, and a lot of my students have actually mentioned this very recently. And under promoting general welfare, there should be better systems in place for labels and publishers to support physical and mental health of their artists. Now, recently, Sony Music Publishing did start their songwriters, I forget exactly what it's called. It's the Songwriters Assistance Program through Sony Music Publishing. So I think other labels, publishers should take note of that. After all, I mean, it's the artist that is the lifeblood of everything that we're doing. If they're not doing very well, the health of the label also suffers. A really big one, and these are in no order, they're in order of the Constitution, but not in order of importance. But all of the industry should take a really hard look at ceasing exploitive practices that are tied to race, tied to gender, and in general, just tied to power imbalance. The industry thrives because of power imbalance. As artists are able to access their own materials for production, for distribution, for marketing purposes, the industry is threatened to be heavily democratized. And if I'm an artist, why would I want to work somewhere where I'm being exploited for my art, not owning the masters, and then not being supported mentally or physically? And for securing blessings of liberty, I think labels in the future should embrace freedoms, artistic freedom. They should embrace the artist being able to have direct fan engagement and monetize that through micro-publishing or non-fungible tokens. Now, micro-publishing gets dicey because obviously there's a publisher that's involved and the artist is dealing with their share. But I think labels should look to, well, if we're doing some form of, let's call it crowdsourcing, then less of the financial responsibility is on the label. So we don't have this pressure of owning the masters and owning the artists, what they'd like to think in perpetuity. So these are, I think, broad principles. There are some labels and some publishing companies that are looking at these sorts of things. As a whole, the industry's not, because it's sort of the antithesis of how the business works. We own the copyright, we own the artist, we own your image. Therefore, we have the full rights to everything. But I think for a full functioning, equitable future, labels need to take a look at this. And as new platforms are developed and new labels and new models come about, I see a future where artists start to move in that direction and away from the old system.
That's great, Marcus. And another thing I made a little note of is you saying that we needed more transparency in accounting.
Yes.
I love that, because I think that's one of the things that artists like start to scratch their head about. I know I did back in the day. It's like you think, okay, where did that money get spent? It's so I appreciate that. I saw where you made some notes about, had some things to say about the 360 deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was good. You mentioned, let's see, there was another thing I wrote down here. Yeah, the thing that you're talking about when you say about the artists exploring independent methods and re-recording different tracks. I mean, I personally, I didn't really intend to say this, but I personally have a track that I recorded on my first record that I can't get the masters for. I can't buy them. I mean, they exist in a vault somewhere and they won't sell them. And so, even though I was a small gospel label at the time, I mean, goodness, I have a video out there that's in YouTube world of a track that I cannot own. I can't get the masters for it, and so I just know personally that's frustrating for me, and I can imagine for others. Okay. Any questions? I know there was a question for Michelle. Let's see. Yeah, we had a question for Michelle, but Michelle, we'll come back to that. Let me keep going just for the sake of time. Mary Lauren, are you there? You there? Hi there. Okay? So we're moving into pandemic topic, and I think that is a good place for us to go, right? Because it is really what our reality is, and we have got to figure out, right, where to go from here. So I wanted to start with you. The name of your paper, Same Song, Different Verse: Evolution of the Entertainment Industry in the COVID Era. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start by saying this paper is a team effort by myself and Amy Smith. Amy can't be with us today. She is in New York City on a Maymester with students and just, walking her toes off all over the city right now.
And so, you guys are Belmont University. I didn't mention that.
You are correct. We are both assistant professors of music business at Belmont. So we've worked on this research together. When we initially started collaborating and talking about it, she and I just tried to put our heads together and figure out, what are the 4 emerging themes that we've seen come out of COVID, and how has that impacted the music business? And the 4 things that we felt like just really impacted our businesses the most are contract language, insurance policy terms, live streaming, and new social media platforms that popped up. So those 4 things were kind of the focus of our research, and I'll quickly summarize each of those now for you. Amy and I are both attorneys, so that's our angle in this research and in the work that we put together, and the information that I'll be going through with you guys today. But as Marcus said, please feel free to watch our full video. It's 23 minutes long, so I'll be a little bit briefer today. But the first point we talked about was contracts, and there were a lot of provisions, specifically boilerplate provisions, tucked into the back of performance agreements that agencies would just kind of, push out, plug and chug, change the name of the artist, change the amount, change the date, change all the buyer information. But boilerplate provisions just really didn't change much. And obviously, since COVID happened, and even now and going forward, people are paying attention to the boilerplate provisions. They may still be tucked in at the back of the contract, but there are provisions that are being closely paid attention to. And when parties have contractual disputes, the obvious thing to happen is litigation. So another thing that's changed a lot is we're putting a lot of effort into, on the front end, getting the contract right and saying, okay, well, despite the fact that we've tried to draft this contract as unambiguously as possible, if there's some ambiguity, and if something happens, and if something is there to fight about later, do we want to consider something besides having to sue the other party? Do we want to talk about ADR, alternative dispute resolution? Do we want to talk about mandatory mediation? Are there things to think about just in case there's something that no one anticipates happens? Obviously, the force majeure clause is something that everyone immediately dug into as soon as March 2020 happened. That's the provision, again, part of the boilerplate that no one used to pay attention to. It's at the back of the contract, typically, that says, if there is something unavoidable that happens, unforeseen that happens, and it's through no fault of either party. So it's typically things like weather-related issues or strikes or governmental orders, things like that, really things that never happen. If those things do happen, then can one of the sides renege on the contract? Can you get your money back? Or can you get a refund? All the things. So those are the types of things that a force majeure clause historically has always dealt with and addressed, and it still does address those sorts of things, but now we're really paying close attention to it. And I don't want contracts to take up the most time, but honestly, I think that's probably the biggest thing from what Amy and I are seeing that's come out of COVID is we're all paying attention now to every single word of the contract and making sure that it's buttoned up as tightly as possible, and obviously trying to make sure that it's in favor of the side that we're on. Insurance is another thing that's been huge during COVID. You know, everybody dusted off those insurance policies, and a lot of people read them for the first time and asked the question, you know, am I covered in this COVID situation? Is my policy going to cover this? And unfortunately, we've seen over the last several months, a lot of companies just excluding COVID occurrences from their insurance policy altogether. So we've seen insurers really have to increase premiums, really tighten up what's happening in the underwriting process, and ultimately push the risk to the people putting on the shows, the producers and the promoters. Other things that have changed, moving on, are live streaming. Obviously, that was part of our industry before COVID. Now it's really risen to the occasion and become its own standalone sector of the music business. And I think everyone has recognized that's a new creative way for our creators to make money, and it's a viable source of revenue. I saw today that I think it wasn't Amazon. It was Apple. Yeah, it was Apple Music Live announced today that they are kicking off new portions of their platform that are going to be exclusively devoted to live streaming live concerts. And it's going to kick off, I think it's Friday or Saturday, with Harry Styles. So it's going to give, I think the number was 167 million people around the world an opportunity to see this concert and be a part of it. So the fourth thing that we really focused on was the emergence of new social media platforms. I think that the obvious one is Zoom. Here we are, on those of us on this webinar. And the other one is TikTok. And I was having a conversation yesterday with a friend that's in A&R at a major label here in Nashville. And she did not downplay TikTok, but she acknowledged, yeah, we signed Priscilla Block. We signed this particular artist because of TikTok. But it's been great for music discovery, both for people at the label and just for people, like us, like consumers and fans that are seeing something, discovering something on TikTok, and then turning around and finding it on the Spotify's of the world or the Apple Musics of the world. So we've seen that really increase engagement on other platforms. So those are the four areas that we focused on, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end, or if anybody wants to email me, we can talk more.
That's great. Thank you, Mary Lauren. And Storm and Gigi, come on with us here, because, you know, she's talking about the platforms, all of a sudden discovering new platforms, right? And I think that leads its way right into what your topic is of the studying about the music ecosystems, right? So tell us about your topic, your paper, whichever one of you wants to go first.
Well, I can.
Storm, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, we should have practiced, I guess. But first of all, thank you, MEIEA, for a great conference. This has been awesome. It's been great seeing the other speakers, and we're glad to be a part of this. The crux of our research started actually when Gigi and I put together very last minute a conference at the beginning of what really was the outset of the pandemic, involving community leaders in music ecosystems throughout the world. And in that conference, we heard from many of the players. We heard from new organizations that were forming at the forefront of the pandemic and in addressing the situation in communities. And after that, after we got that crazy idea through, who knows what we were drinking when we decided to do it again. And through that second conference, we also gathered a lot of data and archived a great deal of content when we heard what was going on in various communities and in various organizations that were addressing the music ecosystems in the pandemic. And we didn't even with the second conference have enough time to visit with leaders in communities and regions and states throughout the world. So we set about forming this Amplify Music Communities research, and we're thankful to MEIEA for actually providing funding through their grant program for us to tackle this research. And we've had partners as well in connecting us with various communities throughout the world, and have put together a very, very cool collection of archived content about what's going on through the pandemic. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gigi, and she can walk us through the rest of it.
Right. So we wanted in part to invite you all to the dance. So we have 73 recorded focus groups, video and audio, 30 countries, 30 countries, 75 city studies. We have literature reviews pre-pandemic. We have literature reviews post-pandemic of all the research that's coming out. One of Storm's Past students has put together a global research guide for your undergrad and graduate students who'd want to dive into this. And we worked with this project with graduates and interns from 5 different universities, as this happened with 45 organizations around the world. So we have rich research. We have research that's coming out of it. I'm a big narrative analysis junkie, so taking this all through Otter.ai and Descript, and then Deduce to kind of go through to see what the narratives, emerging leadership trends. We have lots of analysis already, but still fine tuning it into a paper that we're going to be heading into the MEIEA land. But this is like the true global story. What is happening globally and locally that we really have a hard time getting our hands around in terms of live music and the ecosystems around them. So it picks up from the prior paper looking at the company level, that this then steps up into the how has this really impacted different cities, different leadership, different organizations that are formed or been decimated, and then how is this happening differently around the world. So I guess one of the other gifts we've received from this is we probably know many more people now than we ever knew 2 years ago when this journey began. And we've spoken at something like 14 online conferences, gathering more research partners and collaborators. So I've put into the chat in the MEIEA Summit page a bit.ly to a page of lots of resources. So whether you want to pick up some of the tools, look at the research guide, or we would love you to think about, could your students get engaged with this in your local community? Would they like to be doing interviews, learning how to do live DMA? Absolutely link with live DMA, as Heinrich said. In fact, they've got, and I put on the page, a job opening. So if you know of anybody who's looking to be their research lead, live DMA is 6 different countrywide independent music venue organizations in Europe, that there's a whole connective tissue that we've been able to help build here. And so if there's interest that your students have, especially grad students who would like a great rich data set, which I know sometimes is a hard thing to do, but we're trying to figure out we're wrapping this up. We presented at the Malin conference. We provided a lot of this information back to all the organizations. And so what is it that you guys might want to do? And would you like to take any of this work forward in your local communities? Storm, I know I feel like I'm pitching a used car salesman thing. And come buy this. No, but come play with us and come work with us.
Well,
Absolutely.
And I love that you were looking for more, research, like just trying to find some more if anybody wants to add to the body of work, right? I think that's great.
Absolutely.
Waleed, I'm going to bring you on in because I think that kind of segues right straight on into where you are, because, with our students, eventually what they're wanting to be, right, are touring musicians. And so talk to us a little bit about your research and your study. Tell us about it. I'm going to let you say I'm looking for the real title here. So
the title of the
you're
study,
from Cal State Fullerton, and I don't think I said where Gigi and Storm were from. Gigi is from UCLA Emerita, right? And Storm is University of Colorado Denver. So Waleed, but you're Cal State Fullerton. Tell us about your paper.
Yeah, the title of the study is Independent Musicians Touring Experiences Before and After the COVID-19 Shutdown. So initially I had written this study before the COVID-19 situation even happened back in 2019. I was going to talk to independent musicians about what it's like to be touring, in particular circuits in which they don't have a lot of assistance. They are managing their own affairs. They are driving their own vans. They are roadieing their own equipment. They are booking their own shows. And so I was really looking at musicians at that level and seeing what life is like. And that's, of course, back in 2019. And I had filed for the study. It finally got some funding and whatnot. And by that point in time, it was February 2020. And of course, we knew what happened a month later. So my study was shelved for quite a while I was waiting to see what ended up happening with venues and reopening of shows and whatnot. So it took a little while for this to kind of get going. Eventually, I started up, it was April of 2021. And I did do a few interviews just to kind of get things moving along and seeing what I need to be asking. But the idea here now is really looking at where were musicians before. And again, these are independent musicians, and where are they now? And I had some questions, of course, some research questions, and looking at the challenges that they had faced, and also understanding, during the lockdown, how do they maintain their viability financially, socially, musically, of course, and also their personal well-being too. And then also thinking about their projections and opinions of, okay, now that some of the lockdown restrictions have eased and some of the venues have reopened, what are they looking forward to, and what are some of their ideas moving forward as to how they will be operating? So the objective here was to kind of figure out, where are we with independent touring musicians? And again, many of these musicians having to handle a lot of things on their own. They don't have funding that is coming in from the major label. They don't have funding that is coming in from all kinds of other avenues. Most of them are really kind of trying to just get by with putting gas in their van and moving on to the next show. So the qualifications for my study were looking for those types of musicians that don't have those types of affiliations, and that they also are touring at least a couple months a year, and really are driving vans and RVs and things of that nature. They don't have hired coaches that they are working with. So I put out a call for participants. I got several back and was able to do quite a few in-depth interviews. And that's really part of my study's design, is talking to these folks in depth and asking several questions based on a interviewer's guide that I had pre-prepared. And I had these really in-depth conversations with some of these musicians for over an hour. My average interview time is 47 minutes, which is great. So I had a really good chance to get some detail and some depth from them as to what they had to say. And, talking about it, of course, pre-COVID-19, a lot of these musicians were just talking about how they handled everything on their own. They were the driver. They were the booking agent. They were the tour manager. They were the roadie. They were the folks booking the hotels, booking the flights, booking whatever they needed to book. They were handling a lot of that on their own. They were the merch person. So they'd play the show, run to the booth, and sell the merch right there too. And then they also talked about some of the preparation that they had done each day. What were their routines like when it came to mentally preparing, sitting in a van for 10 hours for you to drive to your next destination, what that means, especially when you're in a van with 3 or 4 other people and you're all cramped together for a month with all of your gear in the back. So, things of that nature, just talking about those experiences and what that was like, their roles and their routines. I got from that to the pivot. And of course, COVID happens. What do they do at that point in time? A lot of them just talked about how they need to engage in new technologies, that, okay, they're stuck at home. What happens now? And they were thinking about ways in which they can still connect with their audiences, still provide some kind of content. So a lot of them engaged in video, and some had never done video before. Others had done video, but never done live video before. So they had to learn these new platforms, learn these new technologies, kind of on the fly, and experiment and see what would work with their audiences. Some of them actually took on some new jobs too. One of them talked about how he became an apprentice plumber. So, just took on something completely different and new. Others talked about how they created new merchandise, and they either reissued old merchandise, they brought in new things as well. Some of them had talked about writing jingles and other types of writing that they did to help supplement their income. So they had to engage in ways in which they had pivoted and said, okay, we're stuck at home. Venues are closed. We can't hit the road. We can't jump in the van. What do we do at this point in time? Quite a few of them did a lot of home recording. And I think that was important that they had those tools and technologies available to put out releases and to kind of continue the flow of being a musician, even though they were unable to obviously play live. And then again, the technologies were important because they wanted to connect with their audiences, and fan communication was really vital. I think that they really found some necessary technologies to make that happen. And they kind of stepped out of their comfort zone sometimes to make that happen. And, nowadays what they are doing, of course, is quite a few of them are back on the road, but they are a little uncertain about, should we commit to a whole month, or should we just do a week at a time, or maybe just do some flyouts and weekend dates and things of that nature, so that way they don't put too much on the line when it comes to booking ahead. Some other issues are well-being, differences of COVID issues from state to state or county to county or whatever it may be. One of them talked about, he said, I'm a hugger. I love to hug my fans. And unfortunately, I just can't see myself hugging fans anytime in the near future because, I love to do that kind of stuff and take close pictures with them, but I just need to be a lot more considerate and be concerned for my own health and the health of my fans as well. So I got a lot of really great information when it comes to how they're going to operate moving forward. But I'm still looking for more musicians to interview. So folks out there who are watching, if you know of musicians who you think might qualify, please email me. My email address is at the very end of my video, and I'd love to have more musicians. I'd like to continue to build on the study as much as possible. And, I want to know, what are their projections? What are they looking at for the remainder of 22 and into 23, if they can even look that far into the future? And I want to know as well, as far as how I can engage in creating more categories and themes and kind of understand, other focuses I can look at when it comes to engaging in this research. So I'm continuing to recruit participants, and I'm looking forward to seeing what I can put together for publication. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. And thank you to everyone. And again, as you were saying, you're still looking for research and wanting to add to your research. And I think that's a common theme. Another common theme that I'm hearing here is that COVID has pushed us, hasn't it? And pushed us to go to a whole new place. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to end things here where we are, is because I think that it's, bad things happen in this world, don't they? And what you have to do is you just have to learn from them. And I think that might be where we are as a culture, is we're trying to find a way to learn from this. We had a couple of questions. I would love, Alex, if we could get maybe everybody back on the screen, or I know that Michelle, I know there's a question here for you. Are there a lot of differences in the research focuses between different parts of the world?
Yeah. I almost didn't unmute myself, and then you would have had to say you're muted. Like, how has that not happened? There are a lot of differences. I did include a lot of countries in this. There were many more studies that I'm sure did not get to, so I referenced them, but don't analyze them all. But specifically, there's been some incredible research out of Canada over the last 2 months. So both the Canadian Independent Music Association, they partnered with an organization called Breaking Down Racial Barriers. And that study is really interesting in particular because they make a point of, while intersectionality is important to acknowledge, that, maybe this is central, that we tend to bucket a lot of different issues into one word called diversity, and that by doing that, we actually euphemize and don't actually say what we mean to say. And the Breaking Down Racial Barriers study basically says, look, we have to call this what it is. It's anti-Black racism in the music business. And it's an incredible study. What's also unique about that study is it was done qualitatively first. So it was not a survey that then followed up with interviews. It was a series of roundtable discussions among Black people in the Canadian music industry and observations made. So it was research done from the Black perspective and not white people researching Black people, or white people or like straight people researching gay people. It was coming from the community themselves. And I think that is really powerful. I think that study in particular, it is incredibly direct, and it did give me pause of like, okay, yeah, you're right. When we say diversity and we try to include everyone in that, I mean, frankly, most often recently, people with disabilities get left out a lot of diversity issues, because there's some sort of hierarchy. And I speak to that in the study, in the paper, and the presentation as well, that a lot of this research is pointing to hierarchies within these systems of oppression. But in terms of the international topic, Australia was the only study that really showed progress for women. And I thought that was really interesting. And I posed some questions as to why that might be, but I certainly don't have the answers. But I think that is compelling to look at. And I also think one thing I say is as we look deeper into specific genres, we're going to find different genres having progress. And I think we can learn more. So research I'm coming out with this summer is about Americana music and the radio charts. And I think you're going to see slightly different stories as we start to hear more genre-specific research.
Yeah,
Marcus, long-winded there.
No, it's okay. Marcus, real quick, we had a question. There's been a movement by some folks to ban the term master recording from recording contracts. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts about the future use of that term in a more perfect union, and thanks for a great presentation. Real quick, what do you think, Marcus?
I'm sort of divided on that. I know there's, I think this originally came up, I want to say Pharrell Williams in a talked about the industry use of master and slave about recordings, but also the context that applies to, Black artists in particular. And I want to say that maybe Dina Lepold, who more recently advocated for just abandoning the terms altogether. And I'll be clear, since we're talking Constitution and this sort of thing, I'm not a strict constructionist, right? And I can't be.
Real quick, we've got one other question.
I'm sorry. So I would say it would be a good thing visually to get rid of the terms. That has little impact on whether artists actually are able to reclaim those recordings or not. It would be a bigger statement to let them reclaim the recordings, since I won't use the term right now. But that does little to switch ownership. It would be cosmetic without actually transferring the rights back to the artist. On a social perspective, I think it does little. This is a little bit outside the topic, but it does little to change the name of it if the music itself is still derogatory.
Okay.
I'll just stop there.
Well, that's okay. Now, for Storm and Gigi, your a question here. You're connected with Live DMA, right? Let me know otherwise. It's what one of the questions was. And then the next, what's Gigi and Storm? What's the next step for you in this?
I will start on the Live DMA. Yes, and I put in the chat the job description they have available for a research officer position. I know all of you are fully employed, but in case you have students or grad students who would love to live in France or work remotely, going forward, there's interesting threads that have come out of it. And I think that probably Storm and I are pulling different threads out of it going forward. Where I'm moving forward is in 2019, I did 3 things across Los Angeles on the future of music in LA, action research in the community with groups. And right now negotiating to do that again with different partners in different communities in LA in about 3 different cities. And some of it has to do with rethinking the role of place and real estate in creative arts. A lot of ownership changes have happened. Storm?
The good news is we've amassed a great deal of archiving. The bad news is we've amassed a great deal of archiving, and our next step is to get some documented, comprehensive materials, i.e. research papers and presentations out there to summarize our findings.
Well, and to use it in the classroom.
And to use
Right,
it in the
right.
classroom, our
Exactly.
own and hopefully you all's.
Well, thank you guys so very much. This was a lot to fit into 50 minutes. I don't quite know how we did it, but I want to also thank my assistant, Sean Young. He could come on camera too, maybe, who was helping me with the chat. I think the moral to this story, everybody, is that we have to find a way to move forward, right? Learn from the place where we've been, and Marcus, I'm going to use your phrase, try to find a more perfect union. I think that we are certainly not there yet. I think that all of us as educators see things every single day that should not be, right? And things that we want to try to. I was telling a friend not too long ago, I'm a problem solver. I get in and I just, for some odd reason, I love to solve problems. And I think that's what we're all trying to do as educators is we've got to find a way to solve this problem or at least give it a shot, right? At least work hard at it to make it a more perfect union. And so, rethinking the future, I hope that our listeners here have gained something from this as we try together, as all of us try to rethink the future.
Kelly, incredible job. We're a lot of people.
Well, I don't know if we made it yet, but we tried to, didn't we?
Really impressive.
Well,
impressive.
I appreciate that. I'm sorry if I pushed really hard, but thank you guys and anybody, whoever's out there listening. Please reach out to these folks. They worked very, very hard on their research, and it was just fascinating to watch through the videos and read through the papers. And I've done research myself before, so I know what kind of time goes into that. And so congratulations on your papers and the time that you spent doing this. So I guess that's a wrap up, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you, MEIEA, for allowing us this opportunity. Mary Lauren, did you have anything closing to say? We didn't hear from you on a question. Did we have a question? I don't think we did.
No, our video was just so thorough. No questions. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Kelly. Great job. Thank you, MEIEA.
No.
Thank you. Let's see. I think we're done. Bye. Armin, were you going to join us at some point or no?
I am about to jump in and just thank you and everyone that participated. We've produced over the last couple days over 18 hours of content, and I counted 61 people who have participated so far since yesterday at 9 a.m. So thank you to everyone who's participated. There is a link. We'd love to see you just for a few minutes before we say bye. The link is under the video, the live screen view. So just give us 2 minutes, click on that link, and you will be taken into Zoom. And we'll just see you there for a few minutes to talk briefly about our upcoming Vegas summit. So I'll see you guys soon.
All
Take
right.
care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.